to Proceed at Your Own Risk, a guide for risk management. I'm Jennifer Monarch, the 4-H Youth Development Educator in Du Bois County, and I'm here to talk about risk management. I know that topic is really not exciting for a lot of people, and a lot of times that's a time where you tune out. But it's important to know as a 4-H volunteer just how important risk management is and great ways to help reduce your risk or manage your risk as you go about your role as a 4-H volunteer. So just a little overview about what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to discuss our handouts that I have available in the office. If you would like some of these handouts that I have gathered that I thought would be useful for you as a 4-H volunteer, just feel free to contact me and I can give those to you. As well, we're going to talk about an overview of risk management and the risk management process, as well as risk management strategies. And then finally, we're going to talk about some volunteer requirements and risk management strategies or procedures. So here are the handouts that I have gathered. If you would like to request some or all of them, I do have them available. The first few are just different informational pieces that could give you some useful information in managing risk management as a 4-H volunteer. The first one is about liability of 4-H volunteers. Again, that's really important to realize what you may or may not be liable for and how to manage that liability and maybe reduce your liability in certain situations. I also have a risk management checklist, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but this is a very useful tool if you're trying to find out, what are the risks involved in holding certain events or meetings. We have adult behavioral expectations, which is an important part for the 4-H volunteer, and it's a critical piece in our risk management process. Also just have some general volunteer information regarding risk management. A lot of these resources came from other extensions around the country. The great thing about having extension is you have this huge network of resources, not just from Purdue University, but also from all of the land-grant institutions across the country. Then some just additional information about how to protect our children, how to protect children from sexual abuse, and then just some forms that are really important as a 4-H volunteer in managing risk. They include permission forms for field trips, whether they be 4-H members or non-4-H members, an activity manifest form, which is something we have in Du Bois County that is necessary to just kind of alert us of what activity you're doing and a little bit before you do it to make sure that you have taken the necessary precautions for that activity. And then an incident or accident report form, which is really important. If anything at all happens, you need to fill that out. And then the health form and the adult youth form, which we will also talk about a little bit later as well. So here is one of my references for this presentation where I got a lot of the resources that are part of the handouts and different things. This is from, again, University of Wisconsin Extension. And as I mentioned before, the huge extension network is really amazing, and we get a lot of useful tools from other 4-H information across the state and country. So now we're going to talk just a little bit about risk management and the overview of that. So we keep saying risk management. Well, what is that? Well, this is the definition as it relates to 4-H. So it means the 4-H club, group, or planning committee anticipates potential risks as the activity is planned and decides ways to manage these risks. So again, before any event or club meeting or any activity of any kind, the group in charge, the volunteers, the extension staff, everyone, anticipate some potential risks, and you plan and make actions to try and manage those risks. So why do we pay attention to risk management? Why is it necessary? Well, it becomes an important educational component of our programs, focusing on safety and prevention. Shooting sports is a very big club in Du Bois County, and one of the important things, really important components of shooting sports is safety and prevention. Again, shooting sports, that has a large risk involved. So how can we manage that risk? Well, by teaching safety and prevention and how we can prevent some of the stories we hear that happen, accidents and different things that we hear. This is a great way to prevent that. So even in our program, risk management is ingrained in it. Again, there's lots of safety that we teach throughout our program. So why would we not follow the same procedures as 4-H volunteers? We need to set examples for our members. Another reason to pay attention to risk management is because it allows us to focus in a safe, comfortable environment. We're ensuring that the participants we have in 4-H are in a safe, comfortable environment. I think this is a really interesting fact. Some of you may have heard about this, but it's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is a theory that I think is really eye-opening that I learned and I just like to reference a lot. And basically it says that we have certain needs that come before others. And in order to meet certain needs, we have to have the ones below them met first. And it kind of looks like a little pyramid. And at the bottom of this pyramid, we have our physiological needs. That's things like food, water, shelter, things that we are critical to our survival. So before we can worry about anything else or learn and try and even meet any other need, we have to have those needs met first. Well, what comes next after those physiological needs? Well, then we have our safety and our environment needs. So we need to feel safe as people. So unless we have those safety needs met, we're not going to move up on the ladder. Because again, if you feel unsafe in a situation, you're not going to be able to think about anything else. And then above safety, we start to have our belonging. So our sense of belonging and feeling comfortable. Again, stuff that 4-H can really create. And then even above that is our academic needs. So in order for kids to learn, they not only have to have their physiological needs met, they have to have their safety needs met and their belonging needs met before they can begin to think about learning something. So I think that's really important to remember. And in risk management is really all about that safety part and making an environment where kids feel safe and comfortable. Again, Du Bois County, I think, is a great place where people do feel safe, but we need to make sure we're thinking about that safety piece in everything we do, because we do want our kids to feel safe. Finally, volunteers limit their liability exposure. So again, who wouldn't want to limit their exposure to liability? I would. So again, lots of reasons to pay attention to risk management. It's important to know that risk management is actually a process. There are 3 phases to this process, but as you can see, it's really a cycle. So it's really never ending as far as risk management is concerned. The first phase of risk management is risk analysis. And this is where you start, identifying and evaluating or measuring what the risks are involved in a certain situation. That's where I mentioned before a checklist. That's where that's going to be really important and useful as a 4-H volunteer to look over the checklist and analyze what are some of the risks that could happen in this situation and how can I prevent them. Next phase is risk response. So risk control, financing, and communication. So what are some of those risks? How can we prevent them and make plans to manage that risk and, really figure out how we're going to respond to those risks. And then finally, we're going to monitor and evaluate our risk plans. So we're going to see, well, how is our risk situation going? Is this, overkill? Are we doing too much? Are we doing too little? Most of the time, in a lot of situations, it's often that you get into trouble when you're doing too little. So it is really important, again, better safe than sorry. Making sure that you're doing everything you can to protect the members of 4-H, the community in 4-H, because it is so pivotal to our county here in Du Bois County. And then as I mentioned before, it is a cycle. So again, it's never really ending. We're always identifying, evaluating, and managing the risks that are concerned in a certain environment or activity. So how do we manage risk? Well, there are 4 strategies we use to manage risk. The first one is reduce. You will hear this one a lot. And that means to lessen in extent, amount, number, degree, or price. Includes gaining control of the variables of the activity. So an example of this would be to modify the program or facility, such as adding a fence to separate the public from animals in a show ring. There are lots of things that happen at the fair to kind of create safety. Again, they do have those fences. We also have adult volunteers that stand around to make sure the animals don't run out. and just to protect the kids in case anything happens. So another management strategy would be to transfer. So shifting all or part of a risk to another party. Insurance is the most common method of risk transfer. As you should know, we do have insurance coverage that is included with a 4-H membership and as a 4-H volunteer. And that is to help us transfer some of that risk over to another party. Another example of this would be a charter a bus instead of using our personal vehicles. So then the bus and they take on the liability instead of us in our personal driving. Or to hold a meeting in a public place instead of our own personal home. This is obviously the best practice to hold it outside of the home. I know we think that nothing can really happen, but anytime something minor might happen in your home could be due to your piece of furniture you have or a kid knocking something off your counter that you never thought would be of risk, but it ends up causing a risk. Well, you wouldn't have to worry about those things if you hold meetings in a public place, which is why that is a recommendation. Third way to manage risk is to avoid it, and that would be taking steps to remove a hazard, engage in an alternative activity, or otherwise end a specific exposure. So what are some ways that we might do that? And it says to replace one activity with another or to discontinue a high-risk event. One way that there are certain activities in the past that were done that are no longer done because of some of those risks. Like, for example, pig wrestling is a common one that is not done in this county anymore, and part of that is to remove the hazard that could be caused from that, whether it be for the person who is wrestling or the pig itself. Again, we're not just thinking about people all the time. Sometimes there are animals we have to remove the risk for the animal. Again, another way we might avoid risk would be if we have to cancel a certain animals being allowed at the fair a certain year, like last year when we did not have poultry. That we wanted to completely remove that hazard because of the chance of the avian flu spreading between the birds. Again, is it possible that may not happen? Sure. But we want to avoid the risk at all and make sure for sure that it doesn't happen. So we completely avoided that last year. Finally, we can assume responsibility, which means to take upon oneself or undertake. An example is to decide all necessary precautions have been taken and go ahead with the conducting of the event. So if we feel comfortable that we have avoided risk at all possible as much as we can, then we're going to go ahead and assume that risk. But I do think it's important to kind of consider the other strategies before we just assume all the risk. And again, I think the checklist and things like that will help. So what are some expectations of volunteers? Well, this is something I do think is important just to think about whenever we're talking about risk management. And that is that being a 4-H volunteer is a privilege that you all have been given, and it's not necessarily a right. Sometimes people think, well, I'm volunteering, I'm helping you out, that, I don't have to follow the rules. Well, that is not necessarily true, and part of that has to do with risk management and trying to protect everyone. We do have certain requirements of all volunteers. Volunteers are required to complete certain health forms and incident report forms and take out special event activity insurance when needed. These are things that are required of volunteers to help manage the risk in the 4-H program. Sometimes we think that, well, it doesn't really matter, but it really does. And we need to make sure, I know you are volunteers and we really appreciate your work, but we also need to keep the risk of the youth in check. Another way that we help manage risk is by requiring certain things before we allow 4-H volunteers to participate in our program. Those things would be to complete the initial application and background check, to sign up through 4-H Online and complete the adult behavioral expectations form once a year. I think some people with the new online system, they think that, well, once I signed up in it once, I'm good. Well, each year we have kind of transferred over the adult behavioral expectation requirement to 4-H Online. So it's really important each year that you go in and you re-enroll as a 4-H volunteer and re-sign off on those adult behavioral expectations. that is not an option to continue volunteering. We need to make sure that you understand the behavioral expectations and you're reminded of those each year. Again, that has to do with our risk management and making sure that everyone in the program understands the mission and goals of 4-H and how to protect our youth that are participating. Finally, we also need, this is a new requirement this year, but we have to complete minor safety training once every 2 years, and that needs to happen prior to volunteering with minors. So again, I think it's easy to see, I've seen this happen before where a 4-H member was a 10-year member and they want to start volunteering right away, so they continue to go to the club meetings that they were going to before. Well, we can't allow that until they have completed this process. And sometimes it's easy when you know the person to kind of let that slide. But again, this has everything to do with protecting the youth in our program and managing risk. And it's really important that we make sure that all these requirements have been completed before they continue as a volunteer. And again, below I kind of reiterated that. Do not allow a volunteer to begin volunteering with your club until you know they are an approved volunteer. And unfortunately, it is difficult. We do have a lot of volunteers in DuBois County, which is awesome. But I am only one extension educator, and it can be difficult to monitor the number of volunteers all the time. So it is helpful when the volunteers can also help make sure that everyone is following these rules that I've set out here. So here are some other risk management procedures that can be taken. So as I mentioned before, one of the forms that are a handout is an activity manifest form that needs to be submitted to the office at least 3 days before any special event. This is just to make sure we know what's happening in our program, any special activity that's kind of out of the norm, that we are aware of it. And we can also make sure that you are following the appropriate procedures. Like the third bullet here mentions obtaining special events activity insurance. And sometimes the events you need to do this for and the events you're not can be confusing. So if I have an activity manifest form and I know what event you're doing, I can make sure that you've taken the event out of the event insurance if needed. The second bullet point is talking about health forms. And one thing to remember with health forms, this should really just be for special events. And part of that is because some people like to collect health forms at the beginning of the year and keep them all year long. Well, health forms can become outdated and outdated rather quickly. Medical problems can occur at any time, and it's constantly changing medical history. That's why every time you go to the doctor, they ask you every single time, what is your medical history? Same thing is true with this. We're really just going to have these health forms for the special events that we need them for. Your local club meetings, hopefully the parents will be close enough by that we won't need an individual health form at that time. We're going to go ahead and skip to the fourth bullet, and I touched on the event activity insurance a little bit. And that is complete an incident report form, and that is as soon as the accident or incident occurs. This is important to remember too. Sometimes we think, well, they didn't get hurt that badly, I don't need to do it. I don't think anything's going to happen with it. Well, you never know. If you feel even the littlest inkling that you should have filled out an incident report, then you should do it. We need to make sure we have it for every activity. And then if we do need to file, for insurance, that can simplify that process. And we will know exactly when that incident happened. And then finally, to complete a risk management checklist, which again, I can provide for you to assess the risk of a designated event. So if there's any event you're like a little unsure about, well, then you can complete a risk management checklist. It'll also help you just analyze the risk that's involved in, and maybe even just a simple ordinary club event. What are the risks involved in this? It helps you ask those questions to get you really thinking. I just want to thank you for listening. Risk management, as you've heard me mention before, is a really important topic, and it's really important for 4-H volunteers to understand that why we need to follow certain procedures. If you have any questions, feel free to contact the office, and I'd be happy to help you. Thank you.